What's going on? How you all doing today? So, ancient Egypt, they, what do we know so far? We know that they were, to a point, superstitious. We know they like to wrap people up in linen when they died. We know that they almost to the point of worshiping the nature. But in doing so, is it because they were fully aware of what they were doing, or they just went along with the knowledge that they had? This day and age, we live in a information age. There's not too much you can't find out on the internet, in a book, at a library. But back then, it was completely different. They based a lot of their culture, a lot of their way of life on what they saw. You know, you see the sun go up, and then all of a sudden, a couple of months later, the sun go down, and you don't see it no more. Then at a certain time, a certain day, it pops back up again. So the sun literally left and then arose. I mean, today we know that the earth revolves around the sun. But back then they didn't understand that. They knew about the stars, they knew about the sun, but they didn't understand that the sun is not a god. They weren't privy to that information. So they did the best they could. Some people might consider them paganistic. I don't think so. You know better, you do better. It's that simple. It really is. They did the best with what they had. So, with that, let's continue. The professor's talking about the wall art that the ancient Egyptians put on there, specifically the pharaohs, after they went out on a campaign, beat the crap out of somebody, then they came home and said, look what we did. So, yeah, it is what it is.
18th dynasty. It's really great stuff. So there are plenty of good sources for us to learn the history of Egypt, and we've got to use them all. So I love to use literature. I love that. I mean, I just love reading those stories, and I think you'll enjoy it too. But there are plenty of ways we have of learning about Egypt. Let me say one last source that I think is a good source. Other Egyptologists think it's a bad source. It's Herodotus, a Greek tourist, and I emphasize he was a tourist, who went to Egypt around 450 BC. Now, Herodotus was a great guy. He went everywhere. For example, he went to Russia, right? He was visited the Scythians. He talks about those burials. He went down into Ethiopia, right? He went everywhere, right? 450 BC, Egypt was still going on. It was a late period. And he published his works. When I say published, of course, he wrote them down. And the book that he wrote is called Historia. Now, histories. History is the Greek word for research, right? These were his researches. And we get our word history because this is the first history book in the world, right? So we call it history because Herodotus called it. But book 2 of his researches is all about Egypt. So that's a nice source. Somebody who was really there, an eyewitness account in 450 BC of Egypt what was going on. Now, the reason...
Okay, so I'm listening to that, and he's explaining the word history. Now, if you're like me, a lot of people growing up, when they explain what history is his story. His story. Okay. Well, now that I've listened to this, most of that is, I'm not even going to say most of it, because his story means the victor. Whoever wins the war decides what the story is going to, how the story is going to go. But what the professor is saying, to my understanding, is that that's a Greek word for something else. It's a Greek word meaning knowledge, meaning, as he said, research, books on research, books on any given topic that happened before the present. History. So, as we go along, you'll hear a lot of stuff and think, that sounds familiar. And it will sound familiar. But a lot of stuff we got wrong. We've been taught wrong. And this is one of many professors who's dedicated his career to uncovering the hidden truths about certain things. So,
I say some people don't think he's a good source, and we have to be careful with how we use Herodotus. Very careful. He didn't speak the language. He was undoubtedly working for translators, probably had a guide, like a tourist guide, and some of the things he was told weren't necessarily true. He has some strange stories that he tells. Really strange. For example, Herodotus says that carved on the Great Pyramid of Egypt was how many onions and breads and things the workmen were given for working on the pyramid. Now, it doesn't seem right. The pharaoh's not going to build this great pyramid as his tomb and then say, all right, let's put the onions and breads that the guys are given. I think what happened was Herodotus was being taken around by this guide, who was probably illiterate, couldn't read what was inscribed on the pyramid, and they said, Herodotus says, hey, what does that say? And like most guides in Egypt, he made it up. And he said, oh, it says the bread and the beers. So there are many things that are inaccurate in Herodotus. But he's still a good source for many things. So he's one way we have of learning about ancient Egypt. And we'll be talking about Herodotus. But let me tell you a little bit about how we're going to organize this course, how it's going to work. As I said, it flows each year, overflows its banks. And as it overflows, it deposits rich topsoil that enabled the Egyptians to grow plentiful crops. And there's a tremendous consequence of this. If you can grow more food than you need, you can support a large number of people who don't contribute to your economy. And what large number of people are you going to support? An army. Egypt could support a standing army. Now, a standing army, at first, doesn't contribute to the economy. But once it marches out of Egypt, conquers foreign lands, and brings back tribute, then it's really helping the economy. So some people say that it's the Nile that made Egypt great. Even Herodotus, our tourist, he made the famous statement. He said, Egypt is the gift of the Nile. He meant that literally, that the Nile brings the soil, the very soil of Egypt, and deposits it. So that's one theory of what makes Egypt great. Geography. Now, I'm sure it's more than that, though. I mean, it's part of it, of course. I mean, the Nile enabled them to support also not just an army, but priests. They could start having a whole leisure class who could do nothing but think about religion. So, the Nile is an important factor, but also it's the personalities. Egypt was always ruled by a pharaoh, a king with absolute power, a god on earth. And if you had a pharaoh who was a great man, you could do great things. So that's why I say I think it's also the personalities, and I'll be stressing the personalities. But as we go through this history, we're going to do it chronologically. I'm going to start at the beginning, the very beginning. And we're going to go all the way down from building of the pyramids through the great personalities, and we'll end with Cleopatra, the last ruler of Egypt. Right? So we will go chronologically with some side trips. When it's appropriate, we'll do a lecture on mummification, for example, which is my specialty. You've probably gathered by now that Egyptologists come in different flavors. There are those who are the art historians who are interested in the art. There's the philologists interested in the language. Well, my specialty is really mummification, or more broadly, diseases in the ancient world, paleopathology, old suffering. I'm interested in studying mummies to try to figure out what the Egyptians suffered from. So we'll have side tours. We'll do a separate lecture, for example, on magic. But mainly chronologically. Now, let me say something about dates. Don't try to memorize them. You won't remember them anyway, and they're not that important. I always tell my students, what's important is you get the relative chronology. In other words, it's important to know that the pyramids were built when Egypt was just beginning. That when Tutankhamun was placed in his tomb, the pyramids were 1,000 years old. Egypt lasted so long that they had archaeologists excavating in Egypt to figure out who did what, right? Or when Cleopatra ruled, Tutankhamun had been dead for 1,000 years. So what's important is that you get the idea of what came before what. Don't.
Okay. So now the professor is talking about chronologically explaining what happened first, second, and third. Makes sense. Even up to Cleopatra. Some people say Cleopatra was black. Some people say she wasn't. Some people say she was mixed. Who knows? I don't know for sure. But I'm going to let this thing play out so I can find out for myself. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you want to find out too. So as the professor said, he's going to go down the line, down the list, take some side trips, tell you about different things, mummification and some other stuff. So join me next week and we'll discuss this further.